What would your life be like if everyone suddenly listened to you? If everyone took everything you said seriously? If you could effectively convince people to give you what you wanted? Well, over my more than 15 years of combined experience as both a published researcher in the behavioral sciences and as a successful entrepreneur, I've identified 4 strategies that will actually help you make that happen. And these aren't the typical tips communication experts offer. The first strategy you'll want to start using is to identify the type of statement being used. And as we'll see, this helps you gain an insight into the mind of the person you're talking to, so you can better understand how to use words and language they'll be receptive to. You see, when we use words and language, we often don't actually know what we're saying. I know this sounds like a ridiculous thing to claim, but to make this clear, let's imagine the following scenario. You walk into a meeting at work, and your manager is going on and on about how we've tried everything, but you all are just too lazy to get the right things done at the right time, and so our entire workflow is behind schedule. But does the manager actually know what he's saying here? I mean, if we're going to analyze this kind of statement strictly according to its literal meaning, we can automatically identify several components of it as false. We've tried everything seems pretty much impossible, as I'm sure the manager did not try sending a rocket ship into space and try contacting aliens for solutions, which is technically in the domain of everything. You all are just too lazy. The right things at the right time, and our entire workflow is behind schedule, can, as we'll see, be questioned in the same way. Essentially, the manager, like most of us, doesn't even know what he's trying to express in the first place. Instead, he's likely making this statement out of frustration or some other sort of feeling or bias. But if we can successfully clarify his thought process for him, we'll be in the rare position to actually convince him or change his mind. You see, there are 3 main categories of statements people make: connotations versus denotations, inductive versus deductive statements, and value judgments versus value-free judgments. And it's your job to know how to spot them so you can get to the deeper meaning behind people's words and start solving the real problems. When the manager says, "We've tried everything," he's clearly not meaning this literally. Instead, he is expressing what is called a connotation, meaning that these words have further hidden meaning beyond what is literally being said. This is an obvious case, but in your everyday interactions with people, what are people saying to you that has a meaning beyond the literal meaning that you aren't catching? What needs might they be expressing that they themselves might not even be aware of? What emotions might they be feeling? What questions could you ask to politely help them clarify what they mean? This is key. How about when the manager uses the phrase, "Our entire workflow is behind schedule"? Well, this statement is a bit different. It's what's called an inductive statement. An inductive statement is one that makes a claim about empirical reality, or in other words, a claim about something that can be objectively measured in the real world. Now, key question to ask here. Is the entire workflow behind schedule, or are there certain parts of it that are behind schedule and parts that are not? Can we hold off on certain parts of the workflow and prioritize others in the meantime so we can get a satisfactory result? Hopefully you can see that all of these questions not only help us become more persuasive, but they also genuinely help us become better creative problem solvers. You see, these questions are about objective, measurable reality, yet the manager, in an angry state of mind, quickly makes a conclusion that may or may not actually reflect reality. In our everyday lives, or when we're in any sort of conflict or debate with someone, we definitely want to identify which parts of the words and phrases being used are those which we could find some objective data for. Why is this important? Well, imagine someone tells you that, in their experience, people who don't wear glasses are less intelligent than people who do. Well, just as in the case of your manager, you want to be able to quickly identify this as an inductive claim. In which case you'll want to respond with questions such as, what data and statistical analyses do you have to support this? What standard measure of intelligence are you using? And especially, is your personal experience a valid and unbiased source of information, or do we need additional outside sources? Digging deeper into the meanings of people's words and phrases is truly one of the best ways to start getting through to other people. But connotations and inductive statements aren't the only type of statements people unknowingly make. That's why we need the next strategy on this list: identify the value theory. In 2013, I published a theory of value that is held in university libraries throughout the world. But what the heck is a value theory anyway? Well, each of us, whether we're aware of it or not, operates according to some system of values. And let's face it, pretty much all conflicts involve conflicts of values. Most people who discuss persuasion and argumentation tell us that if we encounter a difference of fundamental values, then there's simply no way to resolve the conflict or persuade your opponent. It's just a matter of irreconcilable differences, they tell us. But that's not true at all. Let's examine the most common value theories people hold and how we can still be persuasive no matter our conversational partner's value theory. The first is utilitarianism. People who hold this value system can be thought of as cost-benefit calculators. If a given decision or policy creates more happiness for everyone, or if the benefit of a decision outweighs the cost, then it's a good decision. Who do you know who holds this kind of value theory? The second is deontology. People who hold this value system can be thought of as defenders of rights and duties. They believe that regardless of any cost-benefit analysis, certain rights should be upheld, no matter the practical outcome, and regardless of whether or not the decision leads to more happiness. Is there anyone in your life who fits this description? The third is virtue theory. People who hold this value system can be thought of as focused on excellence. What they prioritize the most is adhering to a certain vision of themselves and a deep focus on their own moral character. And they tend to hold others to a similar standard. Now, are there more value theories than this? Yes, but these are a good few to give you a decent picture of how to identify the value theory of the person you're speaking to. And why is this so important? Well, let's go back to our angry manager again. And let's look at his original statement. We've tried everything, but you all are just too lazy to get the right things done at the right time, and so our entire workflow is behind schedule. There's still a component of this statement we haven't analyzed, and this component is what is called value judgment. If we look at the phrases, you all are just too lazy, and the right things done at the right time, hopefully we can see that these are clearly value judgments. When faced with a value judgment, we want to ask again, politely and tactfully, how do you feel we are being too lazy? And what do you consider to be the right things and the right time? Asking these questions will help us tease out the hidden standards the person holds, and if we continue this process of ongoing questioning, it will become clearer and clearer what their value theory is. If their value theory is, let's say, deontology, then we know they care a lot about rights and duties. Dig deeper in that case. What do they believe is the duty that's not being fulfilled? And why do they care so much about that duty being fulfilled? Why, in the first case, do they even consider it a duty? Trust me, even simply asking these questions and getting a deeper level of clarification from someone is much more likely to help you both get on common ground and identify areas of agreement. But if you want an even more powerful method that allows you to actually defeat someone else's argument almost to the point of embarrassment, you can use this next strategy, but just be careful with it. It's called the reductio ad absurdum. Whereas we've examined inductive statements, the reductio ad absurdum strategy is what is called a deductive approach. And deductive statements in logic are considered especially powerful because, by definition, they have a 100% probability of being true. And you cannot get higher than that. Simply put, the genius of this strategy lies in its ability to prove someone wrong not on your grounds, but on their own grounds, even assuming their position is true. And so this strategy works even if there's a disagreement of values. For instance, let's say there are two people arguing about politics. One is a libertarian and one is a socialist. And before you jump into the comments section to accuse me, no, I am not taking either of these positions here. This is just for the sake of example. Let's say the socialist wanted to use this technique on the libertarian. Well, libertarians believe that there should be no government intervention in the economy, besides helping to protect against force or fraud, or to enforce contracts. But this particular libertarian also believes that her particular town should receive some local subsidy for a company they support. The way the socialist could use the reductio would be the following. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that libertarianism is correct. Well, subsidies of any kind are unjustified on this viewpoint. Therefore, your support of this subsidy is unjustified. And the socialist would be correct. Mind you, this does not automatically make the socialist correct. It simply points out a flaw in the libertarian's position. And do you see how powerful this is? It's so powerful because we don't even need to prove the other person's position wrong. Instead, we can simply tell them, okay, let's assume you're right, and then proceed to show them that even if we assume they're right, their overall argument is flawed. All of the methods we've discussed so far take practice. It's not simply enough to be aware of them. And that's why I've created my newly launched Critical Thinking Academy. This series of modules, training, and live classes is designed to give you individualized practice to level up your critical thinking in ways that are specifically targeted to your needs. You'll not only get to work with me personally, but you'll be surrounded by a community of like-minded individuals who are on the same mission to become better thinkers, improve their communication skills, and increase their problem-solving abilities. Check out the link in the pinned comment below for more information. So even though the reductio ad absurdum is a powerful strategy we can use to prove someone wrong, the reality is that such approaches in the wrong context actually end up making the person hold on to their position even more strongly. You see, you want to know the truth? It's actually impossible to convince people. No matter how many facts, logic, and pieces of evidence we share with others, people will almost always find some way to do the mental gymnastics necessary to continue to hold on to their belief. Therefore, instead of trying to convince people, the most effective approach we can take is to help people convince themselves. But how do we do this? Well, there have been some really great writers out there on this topic. Most notably, Chris Voss, who is a former FBI hostage negotiator, gives us some really great effective tools in his book, Never Split the Difference, which is a great read. But in reality, there are many different approaches, including Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication method and David McRaney's street epistemology, both of which have strong empirical evidence to support their effectiveness. Although these approaches are different in key ways, they all also share some key similarities. So let's summarize these similarities into a few key steps we can use in everyday conversation. The first step all these approaches have in common is creating common ground. Somehow we have to express to the other person that we aren't out to shame them or even to convince them in the first place. Instead, let them know that you truly want to explore their line of reasoning and viewpoint in order to understand them better. Why is this first step so important? Well, if we don't get people to lower their defenses and feel free to share without judgment, then they'll always feel the psychological need to hold on to their position out of a sense of self-defense. When they lower their defenses, therefore, they unknowingly leave open the possibility of changing their mind. The next step could be called clarification. At this step, just as we've discussed previously, we get people to make a claim, and we ask for some sort of clarification. In Rosenberg's method specifically, this takes the form of asking the person, based on what you stated, what is it that you need? The idea here is always to try to find the need behind the claim. But in my opinion, there isn't always a need. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting them to understand and verbally express what they want to express. The last step in this process can be called methods. At this point, we want the person to clarify what their specific methods are for reaching their conclusion. You see, most people don't have any methods, and so asking them this essentially forces them to think of some type of method. And the fact that they don't have one, in most cases, starts to make them question their position. At some point in this process, you want to involve some of what is called pathos as well. When the time is right, sharing some story of a person affected by the issue or problem, and sometimes the solution they eventually found as well, allows the person to relate to and put a human face to the issue. All of this takes practice, lots of it. But if you're able to do this effectively, you'll end up winning more people over than you could ever imagine. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact not only on your own life, but on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.